Hello, everybody, and welcome to my channel, Democracy and Education. My name is Helen Ozia, and I am your lecturer of international relations and political science. Today, I'm going to introduce the third chapter of my book, Education for Democracy in the 21st Century. Welcome back. The name of chapter 3 is Political Parties and Ideologies, and I chose this diagram of the two main parties in the United States, which are the Democratic Party, which is more liberal, progressive, and the Republican Party, which is considered more conservative, more traditional. However, there are other smaller parties at the state level and at the local level. However, before I begin with this presentation, I would like to announce that all images used have either been created by artificial intelligence or have a Shutterstock or other license like Wikimedia Commons. I would like to start the presentation by talking about the concept of pluralism. Well, plural means more than one. And in a political context, pluralism means that there is a diversity of political convictions, values, groups, visions, etc., that live together in peace. Some groups have direct access to political power. I'm talking about political parties, while others hold indirect power by exerting pressure. That is why they're called pressure groups or interest groups. For example, trade unions, non-governmental organizations, associations, civic groups, etc. Now, interest groups exercise indirect political power because they don't participate in elections. My question is, in what ways do these groups exert or exercise political power? We have here two examples of NGOs or pressure groups. Amnesty International, an international NGO whose aim is to defend human rights in practically every country. And then we have an example here of an animal rights organization in the United Kingdom. Now, these organizations, these groups, do not participate directly in elections. However, their way of exercising power is by forming public opinion, by disclosing information that definitely could make politicians consider these points of view because they don't want to lose voters. Now, what is a political party? Well, a political party is an organization that directly participates in elections. In a democracy, there must be at least two political parties to ensure competition for power. In other words, if there is just one political party, we cannot talk about a democratic system. Political parties have many functions, not just to participate in elections. For example, recruiting candidates, organizing campaigns, participating in debates, and forming a government and running the public administration of the country if they win the elections. Now, how are political parties financed? Because definitely political campaigns are expensive, and parties depend on donations. You probably think that donations are illegal because it sounds like lobbying. Well, there must be transparency as to who donates how much to what party. And of course, there are always strings attached. However, in some countries, for example, here in Sweden, parties who have attained a certain number of votes obtain financing by the state. But what is the role of the citizen in political parties? Well, as a citizen, you can become a member of a political party and support it directly or indirectly, for instance, by volunteering or by donating money. Party members vote in the party's internal elections to select candidates that will run for office. Party members can become candidates, but a very, very important part of a political party is the party program or the party platform. What is it? Well, the party platform outlines the party's principles, goals, and ideology. In other words, what makes this party special and different from other parties participating in elections. The platform or program informs citizens about what the party stands for. What can I expect if I vote for this political party? The platform describes the party's position on various issues, such as economic policy, civil rights, environmental policy, immigration, and so on and so forth. But my question is, must voters fully agree with the party platform to vote for that political party? The next question is, why is it important for voters to read the party's programs or platforms? Or is it okay to vote for a candidate because I find him really handsome or likable, or because he's a friend of a friend? And can the party's programs or platforms be changed, or do you think that the principles of the party are written on stone? But now I'm going to present the difference between democratic and anti-democratic parties. Democratic parties view democracy as an end in itself and not merely as a means to gain political power. In other words, democratic parties want to maintain democracy as a form of government. Parties that do not accept pluralism are not democratic, and undemocratic parties have used democratic means, like elections, to gain power, and once in power, destroy democracy. One example of such anti-democratic party was the National Socialist Party of Germany, the NSDAP, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, ran in the 1928 election and entered the German parliament, the Reichstag. But what happened 5 years after? Well, once the National Socialist Party was in charge of the government, ran the country, it banned all other political parties and sent the members of those parties to jail or to concentration camps. the Chinese Communist Party. The Communist Party was established as the only party after the Chinese Revolution of 1949, headed by Mao Zedong. The Communist Party tolerates no opposition, just like the National Socialist Party of Germany. And since there is no opposition, there is dissidence. However, dissidence or criticism of the government is unlawful. And the people who criticize the government very often end up in re-educational facilities or concentration camps. But how about anti-democratic parties in the 21st century, especially in democratic countries? We have here two examples. The Communist Party of Sweden and the Golden Dawn Party of Greece. Now, what makes these parties anti-democratic? Well, the Communist Party does not accept pluralism, and Golden Dawn uses violent means to attain its ends, like killing opponents, like beating up people, beating up critics. I'm going to talk now about political ideologies. But before presenting them, I want to define what an ideology is. An ideology is a set of ideas and values, subjective, of course, a vision of the world. Ideologies are not based on facts. For example, religions. Religions are ideologies that have been declared sacred, and that is why they can be especially dangerous. Ideologies are ready-made thought packages that don't require individuals to question or to use their critical thinking. Why can ideologies be so dangerous? As I said before, you don't need to use your own judgment to accept an ideology. You just need to follow what somebody else said and his or her vision of the world. Here, for example, we have a collage of the different political parties that exist in Germany in the 21st century. For example, the Social Democrats, which is center-left, the Christian Democratic Union, which is center-right, the Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland, which is nationalistic, Die Linke, which is far-left, Klimaliste, which is environmentalist, and so on and so forth. Now here you have many different ideologies which compete for power. Whereas in North Korea, you have one political party, one ideology, and one leader that is seen as a semi-god. So then, while in democracies there are different political ideologies and parties, in authoritarian, totalitarian, or theocratic systems, there is only one ideology that is legal. There is no opposition. There is dissidence, which, as a matter of fact, is illegal. Now I'm going to present some political ideologies. Conservatism, as its name implies, conservatism's aim is to conserve or to preserve what is good and prevent changes that could cause problems. Which party or parties in your country are conservative And what makes them conservative? Liberalism. For liberals, individual freedom is a crucial value, that you can live your life exactly as you wish. However, liberals, just like conservatives, are in favor of free business and a market economy. For liberals, the state should not interfere in the life of the citizen. And liberals in Western Europe, in the United States, and in many other countries are in favor of issues like, for example, free abortion, same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage, like we have here this example of two women getting married in Mexico, or multiple genders like this so-called drag queen who is reading stories to children. These would be totally unacceptable for conservatives. In Europe, social democracy is one of the major ideologies. This ideology developed in European labor movements, but I want to point out that social democracy is not Marxism and has very, very little to do with the principles of Marx and Engels. Social democrats develop what we know as the welfare state. In other words, that citizens have access to free healthcare, free education, that all children can go to a daycare center so the parents can work, etc. Now, it would be wrong to say that these services are free, because they're not. They're financed with taxes. Social justice is a pillar of social democracy. And they have a vision of a democratic socialism where all citizens are equal, or at least where all citizens have equal opportunities. Now, communism is very different from the ideology that we just saw, which is social democracy. Why? Communism is an ideology developed by Marx and Engels in the 19th century, when Marx published a book called Das Kapital and then the Communist Manifesto. It's a non-democratic ideology because for communists, capitalism and the state are to be swept away or destroyed through the proletarian revolution or the workers' revolution. And after the revolution, a dictatorship of the proletariat is to hold power indefinitely. However, in communism, just like in National Socialism, there is no mechanism for the peaceful transfer of power. No elections, no pluralism, and of course, no tolerance for people who have different visions of the world. Fascism. Very often we hear the adjective fascist as an insult, but what does fascism really mean? Well, fascism was created by Benito Mussolini in the 1920s in Italy when he wrote the book, The Doctrine of Fascism. Fascism does not permit any organization outside of the state. In other words, no pluralism whatsoever. And Mussolini said that only through the state can the individual find his or her true essence. In other words, the individual is nothing without the state. As in communism and in National Socialism, there is no formula in fascism for the peaceful transfer of power. And now, National Socialism. Many people know this ideology as Nazism, but the correct name is National Socialism. It developed as an ideology following the publication of Hitler's book Mein Kampf, which in English means My Struggle. National Socialists, like fascists, like communists, do not believe in popular rule. No elections, no pluralism. All parties were banned by the National Socialists in 1933, in July 1933. And for National Socialists, race determines citizenship. There is no naturalization. For example, I could never become a citizen of Nazi Germany because I don't belong to the Aryan race. And of course, only one ideology was permitted, which was National Socialism. While there was certain religious tolerance for Christian churches, the aim of National Socialism was to eventually substitute the Bible in church for Mein Kampf. Of course, no opposition, only dissent. Critics were sent to concentration camps, killed, disappeared, etc. And how is communism in practice? Well, there is no system of popular rule. There is just one party, which is the Communist Party. Only one ideology is permitted, legal, which is Marxism. Communists do not speak of opposition, but of dissidents who are considered criminals and treated as such. Critics are usually placed in re-education camps, which is very degrading, very humiliating, because these so-called re-education camps are nothing but indoctrination institutions. No other ideology in the history of humanity has exterminated more people than communism. About 50 million people were killed by Mao Zedong in China as a result of the introduction of Marxism, and about 20 million in Stalinist Russia. Now, another important ideology in the Western world is feminism. However, feminism is not just one movement, but rather a collection of movements and ideologies that began in the 18th century with Mary Wollstonecraft. This author, this lady, demanded that women should have the right to education. However, later movements advocated for women's right to equal pay for equal work, especially in the 1960s and 70s. Now, what about modern feminism now in the 21st century? Well, radical feminists believe in the so-called patriarchy. For them, this is a structure created by heterosexual men to oppress women and sexual minorities, for example, homosexuals. And anti-feminism surged as a reaction to feminism. Anti-feminists, such as Phyllis Schlafly, as we see here, realized that gender-neutral laws actually disadvantaged women. They are against the Equal Rights Amendment because they were against women being drafted in the army. And nationalism. What is nationalism? Please don't confuse nationalism with National Socialism, because we're talking about two very different ideologies. It would be like confusing social democracy with communism. No, we're talking about different ideologies. Nationalism emphasizes the importance of the community within each nation state. For nationalists, a shared history, language, culture, and set of values is what defines a people or a nation. Nationalists do not oppose international trade or cooperation, provided that national interests take precedence, that the people of the country have priority over international interests, organizations, companies, etc. Nationalists are against mass immigration because they view it as a threat that destabilizes their nation. Letting in people who speak a different language, have a different culture, have different values, etc., means destabilization and eventually the destruction of the country. Now, there are some examples of nationalist governments like Andrzej Duda in Poland and Viktor Orban in Hungary. Of course, they have nothing to do with National Socialism. But I would like to ask you, what is more important, parties or principles? The first question is, do you think that it is possible to agree with a party platform 100%? And the second one, what would be the right thing to do when the politicians that represent your party and or your ideology are corrupt, are demagogues, or incompetent? Should I vote for them? I thank you for your attention and remind you to buy the book Education for Democracy in the 21st Century. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be seeing you.